Salutare, prieteni, suntem alături de Alex de la History Legends și vom urmări cel mai recent videoclip al său. Este vorba despre Emmanuel Macron, care nu știu ce a pățit în ultima vreme, dar s-au camuflat biscuiții în el. Cei care nu văd subtitrarea pentru că urmăresc pe un telefon, da, sunt sfătuiți să întoarcă telefonul la orizontală, da? În felul ăsta imaginea se va întinde pe tot ecranul, deși subtitrarea va fi mai mare, și eventual să dea zoom cu două degete în zona în care este subtitrarea, chiar dacă mă scot pe mine de pe ecranul telefonului, pentru că până la urmă nu eu sunt cel important. Hai să-i dăm de o la treabă.
Is it me, or we are inching towards World War III? As you might have heard, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, is considering the direct intervention of French military personnel in Ukraine.
Madness.
And
Madness
stupidity.
and stupidity.
Modern diplomacy wrote, Macron, an advance of the front towards Odessa or Kiev could trigger an intervention by France. The problem with the French is that they can be quite impulsive in regards to warfare.
Because they always have blue to attack.
On French TV, they are already discussing about the ludicrous idea of sending entire regiments up to the Dnieper to scare the Russian army. What you have to know is that since May 2022, as part of NATO's mission Aigle or Eagle, France is leading a task force of 1,000 soldiers deployed in Romania. What is the...
Da, tremură rușii, Putin este îngrozit, cred că deja este băgat sub pat, da, și dă din codiță, știți imaginea din acel clip de desene animate cu cei trei purceluși, că venea lupul cel rău constând în 1000 de soldați francezi staționați în România, da, și Putin e sub pat acum și din codiță de frică.
their true purpose and what can they do from there? Rumors claim that off camera, Macron also said, anyway, in the coming year, I will have to send some dudes to Odessa. The Ukrainians are already heavily fortifying the region, but with diminishing supplies of ammunition and a shortage of manpower, it might not be enough if Russia decides to launch a full-on offensive across the Dnieper. That's why we could witness Operation OCD, Operation Croissant on the Dnieper, to secure Odessa and maybe Kherson. The objective would be to prevent Ukraine from becoming a landlocked nation.
Let's go. In and out. 20 minutes adventure.
Da? Biata Ucraina nu care cumva să rămână landlocked nation, cum a pățit Republica Moldova. Las pentru Moldova, nu-i problemă, da? Moldova ar avea nevoie doar de o fâșiuță de pământ, că ei practic pot vedea Marea Neagră de la granița lor, dar nu le dau voie eroi, desigur, pe care îi stimăm, îi apreciem pentru că sunt scutul Europei, desigur, da? Conduși în luptă de eroul planetariu. Bravo!
The French could also launch Operation BBC, the Belarus border coordination, to relieve Ukrainian units guarding the sector. There is also a third option involving Moldova.
Vă dați seama că la granița cu Belarusul sunt toate trupele de elită ale Ucrainei acolo, cu ochii pe granița de la nord. O prostie. Sunt probabil niște dăștia de la, în fine, cum îi zice, apărarea teritorială sau ceva de genul ăsta.
Keep the surprise for later in the video. On the 20th of January, French national TV reported that the 12th Regiment of Cuirassiers is currently carrying large-scale exercises near the Ukrainian border with its 13 Leclerc tanks. And Lieutenant Clément...
13 tancuri. Dar francezii ăștia pompează niște cifre, adevărăciuni de cifre. Așa ceva? Wow!
essentially said their 10 million euro tanks currently have no real countermeasures against drones. At Lichny, excellent, I will soon have the entire NATO collection Black Hawk 2, Challenger 2, Abrams, only Leclerc is missing. Realistically, is France even ready for war? That's what newspaper Le Monde was wondering. Meanwhile, Colonel Goya says France is like a crocodile. Big mouth, small arms. What are the true...
Și aici, acum că nu sunt jurnalist, știam acum o săptămână când am aflat știrea, da, nu știu ce, jurnaliști de la nu știu ce publicație franceză au descoperit niște informări care ar fi trebuit să rămână secrete, da, pe care și le trimiteau francezii, ok? Și în care un ofițer de rang superior francez a spus că armata noastră, în comparație cu armata rusă, e ca o trupă de majorete, da?
Projection of force capabilities. They can't just wing it like they do in Africa against rebels fighting with AKs and sandals aboard Toyota pickup trucks. To be honest, France didn't even start fighting that they're already facing ammunition shortages. On the 20th of January, Le Figaro wrote, in France, we have the capacity to produce 20,155 mm shells per
Publicația Mariane mi-a venit acum, cumva, de undeva, mi-am adus aminte ce publicație. Da? Asta a publicat aceste informări secrete. Da? Bun.
year. For your information, that's just enough to help Ukraine for 3 to 4 days of battle. And check out what that same Colonel Goya said recently.
Păi pentru 3-4 zile de război, cred că ajung vreo 13 tancuri și 1000 de oameni. Am exagerat. Ajung pentru vreo 2. Cam așa.
In an interview,
Si on n'a pas les moyens d'envoyer des obus russes, ça veut dire qu'on les a pas non plus pour nous, pour mener éventuellement des opérations de grande ampleur.
meanwhile, some French analysts think that this warmonger rhetoric to be just a political stratagem, right on time for the next European elections set for the summer. What's funny is that some of the most vocal supporters of the war in France don't actually want to fight the war themselves. They claim to be more lethal behind their laptops than with a machine gun. Of course they are. Of course. The worst in all that is that the French army already launched a similar expedition on Odessa in December 1918. French troops disembarked in Odessa to save the White armies from collapse from the advancing Bolsheviks. The operation ended in a complete failure. More on that at the end of the video. Welcome to History Legends. Here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal.
Așa este. Toate clipurile, 5-6, ultimele pe care le-am făcut, vizionând materialele lui Alex de la History Legends, toate au fost demonetizate cu barbarie, pot să spun așa. Deci, mulțumiri celor care mă susțin ca membri ai canalului Noaptea Minții sau pe Patreon și vă invit și pe voi să lăsați un like și să vă abonați dacă nu sunteți abonați.
To keep the show running. Thank you everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. The dilemma is that the French president declared that the war in Ukraine is existential for France.
Une guerre qui est existentielle
De unde și până unde? De unde
pour
și
notre
până?
Europe et pour la France.
Cum este pusă în pericol existența Franței de un război între frații slavi, da? Ucraineni și ruși.
This means that Ukraine's struggle to survive as a nation is also by default France's struggle to survive as a nation against Russia.
Right.
Now the question of the French government is how they can best support Ukraine. Number one, indirect approach. More weapons, more ammunition, more advisors, and especially more money. Number two,
Și ce face cu banii Ucraina? Nu că ar fi răi banii, dar nu poți să transformi așa banii în arme și muniții.
direct military intervention, aka boots on the ground. France also feels bad for having abandoned Poland in 1939. So to make history right and not to repeat the same mistakes, after 2 years of indirect military support, with the Ukrainian army struggling on the battlefield, Macron decided that sending troops to Ukraine could be envisioned in the near future. And he publicly announced it without even warning his NATO partners. In panic mode, many NATO leaders publicly denounced the idea of sending European or alliance troops to Ukraine. However, since then, as you can see on the map, some countries are now favorable to Macron's strategic vision and of a direct military intervention.
Da? Deci toate forțele militare ale NATO, le vedeți aici, hai să spunem, Polonia nu este chiar de glumit cu ea, dar ăștia alții sunt majorete,
Before
la fel
covering
ca francezii. Să ne înțelegem.
Operation Croissant on the Dnieper, let's talk about France's current support to Ukraine. France has already supplied the Ukrainian armed forces with a lot of military equipment. This war effort includes 1,084 anti-tank rockets, 3 Milan anti-tank missile systems, 6 TRF-1 155mm towed guns, 30 Caesar 155mm self-propelled howitzers, 4 M270 LRU rocket launcher vehicles, 2 Total NG air defense missile systems, 6 Mistral manpads, 1 SAMPT air defense missile system, 38 AMX-10RC light tanks, and
Alea sunt tancurile alea cu rotițe, alea de par a fi de jucărie. Foarte potrivite, da, când te lupți undeva cu un trib african, da, sunt perfecte pentru asta, dar nu pentru lupta cu rușii. Și observați aici ce cifre generoase pompează Macron.
250 VAB 4x4 armored personal carriers. As you can see, this is quite significant.
On a déjà donné 40% de notre artillerie. Qu'est-ce qu'on va donner en 2024, à part virer ce qu'il y a dans nos casernes, dans nos régiments, pour les donner aux Ukrainiens, ce qui veut dire que s'il y avait un engagement.
Deci, dacă n-am fost deloc impresionat de armamentul sau de numărul armelor trimise de Franța ucrainenilor, acum nu sunt foarte impresionat de faptul că ei cumva deja au donat, conform a celor spuse de acest om, deja 40%. Deci au mai rămas ei cu 60% care... Da? Hai de capul meu.
De force, sous une forme ou sous une autre, avec quoi partiraient nos soldats.
Bien sûr.
Voilà, c'est tout.
Did you see that? 40% of all the French army's artillery now as for ammunition between 2022 and 20...
Deci vorbea doar de artilerie. Ok, da, artileria este foarte, foarte importantă în acest conflict.
23. France delivered 30,000 artillery shells to Ukraine. In January, a report for the French Senate revealed the country only produced 3,155mm artillery shells per month, of which roughly half is sent to support Ukraine's war efforts.
We are winning!
With that being said, at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, the French production was only 1,000 shells per month. But in the grand scheme of things, Russia is producing about 250,000 artillery munitions per month. This means the Russian industry overtakes the French monthly artillery production in roughly 30 minutes.
Da, deci Franța nu impresionează deloc, da, ca cifre, când vine vorba de armament. Și totuși ce microfon are Alex aici? Și ce sens are pămătuful ăsta? Ce face cu el? După ce termină filmările, se bărbierește sau care e treaba? Că văd că este la interior, deci nu bate vântul. În fine, continuăm.
French TV also admitted that there are French military advisors working with the Ukrainian army staff to plan operations, plus the additional presence of French special forces on the ground. But, as you can expect, very little is known about that. We also know that NATO and France are somewhat involved in military operations in the Black Sea, officially only for intelligence gathering. For example, on the 21st of February 2024, a French E-3F long-range radar detection aircraft operated in the Black Sea, and same thing happened on the 12th of March. Following the leaked conversation of German generals, we learned that British and French personnel are operating cruise missiles donated to Ukraine. Whoa, big surprise! Who would have thought about that? On top of that, there are roughly 300 French military instructors in Poland. It was reported that they can supervise and train roughly 600 Ukrainian recruits per month. To be honest, sometimes I even wonder what they're teaching them. In this documentary by the French national TV, we see this unit clearly struggling to deploy, storm, and clear a very basic trench network with no enemies inside or return fire. Their instructor admitted that the soldiers are too grouped up. They don't know how to maneuver and how they would all be KA or injured in a
Da, deci cum sunt ei acolo strânși toți în pachet, deci este visul umed al oricărui operator de drone first person view rus. Nici nu se face consumare de drone.
Real battle. Indirect military intervention looks very promising. Now the Russians also push stories of hundreds of French foreign volunteers fighting in Ukraine. Like in January, when Russia launched a missile strike against a hotel in Kharkiv, claiming that 60 French foreign volunteers had been KIA. Obviously, we don't know about the exact number, but it's very possible that there were indeed foreign volunteers in that building.
Da, și știm că foarte supărat a fost Macron după acest eveniment.
The Russian telegram talks about the maintenance teams for the damaged Caesar self-propelled artillery to be French technicians. As of now, we can confirm 14 French volunteers KIA in Ukraine. But obviously, if special forces are involved, this could be higher. On the 2nd of February 2024, the BBC wrote, 2 French volunteers KIA in a Russian drone strike. Macron confirms.
2? Deci erau și ăștia unul lângă altul sau ceva.
We don't know who they were or what they were doing there. What's interesting is that shortly after the Kyiv Independent reported, foreign volunteers, NGO workers, and embassy staff are banned from entering parts of Kherson Oblast without permission from the authorities. So all this is the current French involvement in Ukraine. But what if the French army actually decided to intervene? This is what Zelensky said about this possibility on French national TV.
Tant que l'Ukraine est là, tant que l'Ukraine tient, l'armée française peut rester sur le territoire français.
Now, what if the front collapses? Like we said in the introduction, NATO has Mission Aigle deployed in Romania. The 1,000-strong task force is led by a French commander. They act as an observation force that could be strengthened and upgraded into a quick reaction brigade. Thing is, we're actually talking about a multinational battle group. Not all 1,000 are French soldiers. In March 2023, a recon platoon of 27 troops from Luxembourg joined them. So basically the entire army. And in July 2023, a mechanized company from
Deci cum? Ok, deci 27 de trupezi din Luxemburg s-a alăturat francezilor, deci practic toată armata luxemburgheză.
them. So basically the entire army. And in July 2023, a mechanized company from Belgium came to reinforce them, composed of 300 soldiers and 24 Piranha armored fighting vehicles. On the 25th of July, 4 Caesar self-propelled howitzers were added to the contingent. Technically, if the French jump in, the Belgian contingent and these 27 guys from Luxembourg will have to go in as well. And on top of that, we can ask ourselves, how many soldiers can France realistically deploy? Theoretical strength, 1,000 military personnel. But we can definitely expect this battle group to be strengthened in the following months, if there is really an intent to push towards Odessa. Perhaps the Belgian and Luxembourgish contingents could be replaced by French troops, like units of the French Foreign Legion, for example. Realistically, we can expect the French mission to be composed of at least 1,500 to 2,000 men. This would be equivalent to 2 GTIA, Groupement Tactique Interarmes, or in English, Combined Arms Battle Group. From an operational perspective, this task force would depart from the Romanian border. It would have to push 230 kilometers to Odessa along the M34 road through Moldova, hoping all roads are intact and that no Spetsnaz or Transnistrian troops block the path of approach. There was also a faster coastal route, but Russian missile strikes damaged the existing bridge. Then the French task force would need to advance another 50 kilometers up to the Tirihul estuary. Why? Number one, this would provide a natural water barrier to enemy columns. Number two, it would protect the E95 highway linking Odessa with the rest of the country. However, this means, in theory, the French detachment of 1,000 to 2,000 troops would have to defend and cover a front of 60 kilometers on their own. Option two would be to station them somewhere around the Suvarovsky district in order to stop Russian columns from entering the city. The overall objective could be similar as to what the Russians did in Kosovo in 1999. Essentially, on the night of June 11th, Russia sent a peacekeeping force of 30 armored vehicles carrying 250 troops straight to the Pristina International Airport before the NATO contingent could get there. This move by the Russian troops caught NATO by surprise and forced them to negotiate directly with Russia. Now, the $1 million question is the Russian army ready to walk over the bodies of French soldiers to get to Odessa? All these plans, option 1, option 2, they're beautiful, but with what troops? Here from Le Monde on the 30th of January 2024, France begins a drastic reduction in its military personnel in its bases in West Africa. So we can see France is repatriating military personnel to the mainland, perhaps for redeployment to the Eastern Theater. The big problem of the French military is their projection of force capabilities. At this moment, France is said to be able to deploy 15,000 soldiers over the span of multiple weeks, if not months. In theory, this expeditionary force could be equipped with 1,000 vehicles, including 140 Leclerc main battle tanks, 130 Jaguars wheeled armored fighting vehicles, 800 other IFVs, and 48 Caesar self-propelled artillery units. As you can expect, these numbers are extremely optimistic. Other analysts believe that only 10,000 men could actually be deployed. Meanwhile, in 2014, former Chief of Staff General Rakt Madou said that the ground forces could only realistically deploy as many as 7,000 French soldiers abroad. Remember that the peak strength of French deployment in the Sahel was 5,500 troops, with a very limited number of armored vehicles and artillery. Now we're not even talking about the logistics of this entire operation. Just look at the distance between the French border and the Romanian-Ukrainian border. We're talking about 2,000 kilometers. There's no way France can do this on their own. NATO will have to back.
Da? Deci ce distanță este între Franța și cea mai apropiată graniță ucraineană de Franța. Dar hei, războiul ăsta este existențial pentru Franța. De ce? Because. Pentru că automobil.
Back them up. We have to remember that in 2011, during the French intervention against Gaddafi in Libya, NATO had to take over an operation that French forces were simply unable to carry out alone. 2 years later, during the 2013 military intervention in Mali, France asked its allies to strengthen their logistical aid, mainly with transport aircraft. In 2022, Le Point wrote, French withdrawal from Mali, logistical headache ahead. The logistical maneuver consisted of evacuating 2,500 military personnel, and this proved to be extremely complex. Put simply, without US and European logistic support, Operation Croissant on the Dnieper would be impossible. Now, to make the situation even more complicated, on March 10th, French President Emmanuel Macron announced the opening of a permanent military mission in Chisinau in the coming months. The two countries signed a defense agreement on March 7th. Courrier International reported, once again creating surprise, France gives guarantees to Moldova against Russia. So France, a country that can't even deploy 10,000 soldiers abroad, is now handing over defense agreements to everyone, like Willy Wonka and his golden tickets. Let's not forget that in September 2023, the Moldovan army purchased a Groundmaster 200 air defense radar for 14.5 million euros from France. This means there could be an alternative plan with the deployment of French troops in Moldova. And if you ask me, this is where things get really interesting. If there's one French detachment positioned in Romania, and let's say another one equally strong deployed in Moldova, well, their official mission could be to rush towards Odessa if the Russians approach. But this would also be a decoy, when in fact they would concentrate against Transnistria, and that's how they could storm Tiraspol, take over the entire territory, and give it back to Moldova. One objective could be to secure the Kobasna ammunition depot containing 20,000 tons of Soviet-era weapons. This could be done in cooperation with Moldovan army units that have been intensifying military exercises on the border with Transnistria. The big question is the following. What if fighting erupts between French and Russian forces? This escalation could lead the world straight to a nuclear war. We have to remember that the doctrine of former French President de Gaulle regarding nuclear weapons was to use them only to preserve the territorial integrity of the homeland. And I don't think that fighting in Ukraine falls into this category. Meanwhile,
Ba da, Alex, este vorba despre un război existențial pentru Franța.
some analysts believe that Macron's warmonger attitude is only for short-term, opportunistic political goals. You see, there will be European parliamentary elections in June 2024. Things are not looking good for Macron's party. According to the latest polls, it's the far-right opposition party RN that will come out victorious with a 12% lead over Macron's party. That's huge! So what could a hawkish politician do? During a parliamentary debate, Prime Minister Gabriel Attal fell short of accusing the far-right opposition of treason. He said being pro-Putin is simply being pro-Putin, just like you. Support for Ukraine, the parties which vote against will play into Putin's hands, thinks General Vincent Desportes. Even the conservatives railed for the small electoral tactics of the head of state but showed support for Kyiv nonetheless. Actually, this is what the party chief of the conservatives said.
I reiterated the Republicans' total support for Ukraine. But on the other hand, I repeated our complete opposition to the commitment of ground troops.
De troupes au sol.
So by claiming to send troops in Ukraine, Macron and the French establishment can vilify opposition parties and label
Da, și să le facă putiniste pe aceste partide de opoziție.
them as traitors, cowards, agents of the Kremlin, or all three. So let's see if this grandiose military intervention is still on the table after the summer. Now, as for the history lesson, at the end of World War I, the French government was getting concerned by the rise of the Bolsheviks in the Russian Empire. In December 1918, it was decided to launch an expedition towards Ukraine to support the Russian White Armies. In 1981, J. Kim Mulholland summarized the expedition. For most Western historians, the French military intervention appeared to have been badly organized, insufficiently supplied, and ill-defined in its objectives. Politically, the operation made sense. However, before it started, many French generals believed it was not possible militarily speaking. They preferred to arm local anti-Bolshevik forces and limit French involvement to advisors. Even Berthelot, the general in charge of the expedition, quickly realized it was doomed when he was tasked to secure all of Ukraine with only 3 divisions instead of the 12 promised, and one of the 3 divisions was suffering from influenza epidemics. So in exchange, they received some Greek reinforcements, however, who were not very keen to be under French command. Morale of the French troops was low. They were promised demobilization after years of war, and they just wanted to return home. And the cold weather of Eastern Europe was not suitable for colonial troops. Overall, most of the French soldiers didn't even know why they were fighting. On top of that, there were several pro-Bolshevik mutinies. The expedition in Ukraine came under false assumptions. In reality, the White Army of the volunteers was far from united and showed little will to fight. The local population resented Allied intervention, as they preferred the Bolsheviks to the White Army. Unable to stop the advancing Bolshevik troops, the French contingent abandoned Odessa in March 1919. The French military intervention in Ukraine was a sobering lesson in the perils of intervening in another nation's civil war. That's all I have for you today. Let me
Mulțumesc și eu pentru vizionare și mulțumesc și lui Alex pentru aceste materiale extraordinare.